Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Spiritually Curious Therapist. I'm your host, Jodi Silverman, and today's episode is such a special one. I had the absolute pleasure of sitting down with April Isaacs, a writer, photographer, and intuitive storyteller who creates something she calls power story readings. It's a beautiful blend of tarot, personal mythology, and soul guided reflection. After hearing about her work, I was so intrigued that I actually scheduled a power story reading for myself. And I wish I could report back, but I haven't had it yet. But I am so excited to engage with April and have my session. During our conversation, you'll hear us explore how myth and archetype can help us see ourselves more clearly, and how curiosity creates regulation, with storytelling and community becoming a form of collective healing. And just a quick heads up, we did have a few little delays during our recording, so please bear with us through a few pauses and audio glitches, but it is totally worth it, I promise. This one is rich and full of magic. All right, let's dive in. Here's my conversation with April Isaacs. Welcome to the Spiritually Curious Therapist, where science, spirit, and the self come together in the art of healing. I'm Jodi Silverman, psychotherapist, Reiki master, and fellow seeker. Here we explore how presence, compassion, and nervous system wisdom helps us reconnect with the heart, the body, and the soul. Today we have with us April Isaacs. April is a writer, photographer, wanderer, and intuitive storyteller using the tarot. She's the author of the Substack, The Ecstatic Wanderer, where she shares essays, stories, and photography from a life lived on and off the road, wandering North American wildernesses in a van called Firefly. A tarot practitioner at Three Rivers Wellness Group and trained Way of Counsel facilitator, April offers power story tarot readings. Designed from her own personal tarot, journaling, personal mythology, and wilderness rites of passage work and practices, and drawing on one of her core gifts, which is helping people believe in their own power. She recently landed in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which she now calls home. Welcome to the podcast, April.
Thank you so much, Jodi. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I am so excited to hear more about your story and what you are doing in the world. So tell us a little bit about what you do and how you got here.
Yeah. So I think if I'm going to tell you about the power story readings and the origin of how those came about, I'll have to tell you about my wanderings in the van.
Absolutely.
I was nomadic for 5 years, and I recently landed in Santa Fe, New Mexico, as you said. So I'm at the end of a chapter. But 2 years into my wanderings, I bought a van. And before that, I had been living in house sits and hotels and on friends' couches and just kind of vagabonding around, but I always had some kind of stable place where I was either renting. I lived in Taos for a year. So when I bought the van, I was kind of at this crossroads. My house sitting situation had abruptly ended. And I had also been exploring the American West with a Subaru and a rooftop tent. And never camped before I got the rooftop tent. And so I was just kind of feeling into that edge and was really excited about it and excited to explore more in the wilderness. And I I bought a van and it was a little bit on a whim. And I didn't know what I was doing. I thought like I'll maybe find my home in this and have an adventure in doing it. But there was no plan. And I had no idea how anything in the van worked, even. I was terrified that the propane tank would explode. I was terrified that I would get a flat tire in the middle of nowhere. I had all of these really anxious doom scenarios in my head. I didn't really trust myself. I didn't know what was going on. So as I prepared the van shipped to my parents' house in Indiana, bought a whole bunch of things I didn't need, just, in case of any kind of, terrible thing might happen, I would be prepared. And then I realized that I really needed someone to talk to. And in therapy before, but I didn't want a therapist for this. I didn't want to analyze myself. I didn't want to analyze the situation. I didn't want to look at behavioral patterns. I think what I really wanted was a witness to what I was doing, which was really writing off choosing to live a life of uncertainty. And I wanted a witness, but I also wanted a guide. And the first person that came to mind was a woman named Victoria Williams. And Vicky is a labyrinth builder. She's a mythologist. She's also a psychotherapist. But I had come to her for tarot readings. And in these tarot readings, I had tarot readings with her at various crossroads in my life. Like before I took my first solo trip, when I was about to leave a relationship of 7 years. And her tarot readings were medicine for me. She introduced me to gods and goddesses I had never heard of before. It was just something that was more, and she was wise, she was a wise woman. She is a wise woman. So I knew I needed a wise woman for this venture that I was going on. I called Vicky and I asked her if I could have a reading prior to setting out in the van. And then I asked her if we could talk on a regular basis. And she thankfully said yes. So over the next couple of years, Vicky was with me through the whole van journey, and we did tarot together. She taught me the tarot. She uses the Mother Piece deck, and I bought a Mother Piece deck. And then from that, I started doing regular tarot readings for myself, but then also really engaging in personal mythology work. And the personal mythology work took on mostly the form of writing. I write personal essays and memoirs and stories, and I started looking at myself through the lens of some of these myths and bringing other stories and characters. And on a daily basis through my travels, kind of looking through things through a mythic lens. And, just as an example, who I take with me often, who's the eternal wanderer. And that's part of the reason I call myself the ecstatic wanderer. But Odin is he's thirsty for knowledge. He seeks knowledge. He travels looking for knowledge, looking to collect knowledge and find out what's going on in the world. And so I would kind of take on a little bit of that quality of Odin, and that brought a sense of adventure and mystery into my travels and into things that I was doing on a daily basis versus maybe not having that story and thinking I'm aimless. I've been wandering for days. I don't know what I'm doing, right? So engaging in that kind of work myself, and then also wilderness rites of passage. I I did a vision quest of all of these kind of elements kind of formed into the basis of what power story readings are. And then I never really imagined offering these until I had friends of mine request them. And from there, it just kind of snowballed and grew into what it is now. And when the readings, when I would do them for other people, they would start to take a certain shape. I kind of noticed that people were coming to me for the reasons I sought out Vicky, which is, people who weren't necessarily unhappy with their life, but were at some kind of crossroads and in front of some kind of epic decision to make. Either I need to quit this job and find something else. I need to leave my spouse or my partner, or I need to move. I need to find a new home. So all of these things really spoke to me, resonated with me because this is obviously how I came to the tarot and to my personal mythology practice. And then I found that in the tarot readings, mythic figures come up, symbols come up, and the way that people relate to them and feel empowered by them, there's kind of an ennobling thing that happens. And so I realized that people were coming not maybe get like answers for things that they were uncertain about, but they were actually coming to receive a blessing in a way. And we can get more into that, but I'll stop there for now. But that's kind of the origin story of the power story readings.
That is such an inspiring story, and I love when things just seem to unfold in this very organic way, and how these power story readings were something that you used to get you through this transition period in your life while you were doing your wandering, and how they came to be something more than that, not only for yourself, but also for other people who might be seeking that level of support. And I really appreciate what you're saying in terms of people sometimes are just, and I love what you said about your friend Vicky, who was just, you needed a witness.
Mhm.
And that's different than a therapist or even a coach for that matter. So having a place or a person, a story catcher in some ways, to be able to like hold that space for you in a way that's transformative is just such an amazing gift. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about what does a power story reading look like?
Yeah, so power story readings start with opening sacred space. And I have an incantation that I received from Vicky that I use, and I also ask if the person wants to call in any other ancestors or guides into the space. And then once we do that, I few different oracle decks that I use. What I'm feeling in the atmosphere, I'll use a certain deck, but I like to pull just cold, not asking any questions before we've even begun, a few cards just to kind of see maybe what themes might be in the air. I'll pull three or four. Sometimes I'll pull more if it feels right, and then we sit and talk about it, and we sit and talk about if it resonates, what it may bring up, what's really sticking. And I like to also let people know that this is a collaboration of intuitions. So I have my intuition. I have what I can see, what I see in the cards, what I may riff on. They have their intuition too, and their intuition maybe is taking more of a passive form where they hear me say something and it sticks. There's something about it. They can't let it go. It's like it's working on something, right? That's their intuition telling them, pay attention to that, right? They resonate with you in particular to a card. Oh, yes, I recognize this. That's their intuition saying this. Sometimes things just fall away. They don't really have an importance, or maybe they just lay dormant and they come up later on. A Mother Piece deck is a deck that was created, I think, in the early 80s by Vicky Noble, and it's based on the Rider-Waite tarot. It's a little different though. It's kind of reimagined based on ancient goddess cultures and mythologies and stories. So it's more of like a matriarchal kind of deck. And what I'll do is I'll pull a 10 card spread, a sacred wheel spread of the Mother Piece Tarot. And then I dive into what I call my intuitive storytelling, where there are different positions in the spread. We look at what's subconsciously present, what's consciously present. We look at ancient soul themes. We look at the headspace that the person is in right now coming into the reading. We look at hopes and fears, energies that are surrounding the person, people, and then the outcome. And through this wheel, I tell a story, and certain things emerge, certain themes, symbols, characters even from books. Robin Hood is something that comes up a little bit in a few readings, and from that, we just kind of draw on what's really sticking with a person. So, for example, maybe Robin Hood comes up, the son of discs. In the Mother Piece deck, it's represented like Robin Hood. So who is Robin Hood? Robin Hood is a rebel. Robin Hood is a righteous rebel. Robin Hood, a community builder. Robin Hood lives in the woods. Robin Hood is also the the green man. Who is the green man? The green man is the wild man. Now we're getting somewhere. We're kind of digging into that archetype and finding what medicine is in it for someone. But if there's some kind of like curiosity when you hear Robin Hood, I want to hear more about that. I want to hear more about the righteous rebel. That really sticks with me. Then that's something that they will then go and unpack. And I can get into the integration piece later. That's something that can take many forms, personal mythology integration. That could look like, taking archery lessons. That could look like working at a soup kitchen. That could look like reallocating resources, right? These are the sacred stories that come out in the spread. If we want to unpack certain cards on something just to see what else is there. And then, yeah, so that's the majority of the reading. And then at the very end, what I'll do is I pull what I call a do now card. And I like that as kind of a final takeaway because we cover a whole lot and there's a whole lot of invitations someone can receive in a reading with them afterwards. Like, here's some invitations you may want to consider or rituals you may want to bring in. But like having that do now card is kind of like, this is the immediate focus. This is something that you just want to kind of finally take away. And that could be something like rest. That could be some prayer, right? So that's the general structure of the reading.
Sitting here thinking, whoa, that's like a year's worth of therapy.
It's a lot, yeah. And I think my favorite thing about it is really the invitations that come out of it to integrate the personal mythology. I had someone that I read for that her deep soul theme, she had the Knight of Cups. And it just came to me like, you know, this woman is a romantic, she is a romantic. And I suggested or invited that maybe she could signal that in some way, like by wearing some kind of ceremonial red to signal to herself that she's here for romance. She's here not maybe for a person, but for a city, for the food on her table, for the friend that's sitting across from her, for her life. And so the ceremonial red item to signal to herself and to others that she's a romantic and that she's open for romance could look like a red scarf. It could look like a pair of Louboutins bottoms. And this really resonated for her. And she said, it's so incredible because I have always wanted a pair of Louboutins. And so that was her invitation then to go buy the pair of Louboutins and then to wear them in this ritualistic way. So, that's what an invitation type of theme it may be, or a persona. It could also just be a symbol that gets you in touch with a part of yourself that maybe has been dormant.
So I love all of this, and I love the idea of bringing the symbolism and the invitations, and the invitations actually giving people permission to put some of this into action, which I assume leads to the practice of integration. So I do a lot of nervous system work, and nervous system safety is kind of like the hallmark of where I come from. And I talk a lot about how safety and regulation allows the soul to remember. How is this work of creating a power story? How do you see that creating safety in the nervous system so that somebody could feel comfortable going out and getting those pants that they always wanted?
Right. So I, to me, it feels so part of the reason I call it a power story is because I really want people to know that it's different from what I think a general tarot reading might look like.
Yeah.
And I think in a tarot reading, you may have there is some nervous system activation and I guess what you would call auto regulation happening maybe because people want they want certainty. They want to know. is this guy going to call me? Is this guy going to, ask me out again? Does he love me? Should I quit my job? They want some answers. And so they want to hand over their own personal autonomy in a sense to someone to say, this is, yes, he's going to call you. Yes, this is the love of your life. And so I think in those situations that looks and feels very different to me from someone who is resonating with a deep mythological theme, or kind of their ears are perking up in a way, where it's like, I didn't think about that, but that is really intriguing to me. And now I'm going to start going down this rabbit hole, to learn more about that and to learn how that relates to me. I think that myths are part of the wilderness, told orally over time. I also bring in archetypes from stories. One of the archetypes I identify with is Don Quixote. But, there's something about like these timeless figures. I think that it's when we resonate with them, you can kind of feel the curiosity instead of having the certainty, if that makes sense. And I think that that's like an ennobling thing that's happening. It's someone who's really just, finding their spine is a little straighter just hearing this story. Those are kind of some of the embodied things. It's like they kind of feel maybe there's like an invisible crown on their head, you know? And I think that those are kind of some of the body signals that you can feel when you hear these things pop out in the reading, that's something that you maybe want to look at.
You just hit on some really important things. I think one of which is that this process really helps people to pause and turn inward and pay attention to what resonates with their system and their soul as a way of knowing what feels right versus looking to something outside of themselves for those answers. And I see that all the time, April. So many folks, clients, friends, otherwise, who go for tarot readings looking for an answer outside of themselves. And sometimes it can be helpful, but honestly, a lot of times I've seen it be more hurtful, especially when people take action on it.
Yeah,
So I can really appreciate what you're saying. And I know there are a lot of therapists who use tarot in their practice in this way. It's more of a reflective tool than it is a fortune telling tool.
hmm,
And the other thing that I think is so incredibly important and fascinating is what you said about curiosity versus certainty. And so when our nervous system is in a defended state, we cannot be curious. There is no time for curiosity. And seeking certainty actually puts our nervous system in a protective state because when we're looking for certainty, we're basically telling our nervous system that there's some kind of threat, like we're not feeling safe because we don't have the answer. And so that shift in this process from the seeking for certainty to being open and curious is that shift from a defended nervous system state to one that is more in what we call like the safe and connected, where we are curious, we're engaged, we are connected and grounded. And that it's such a beautiful way to bring that into somebody's system.
I agree. Yeah.
I'm wondering, like, so what I'm also hearing, like, and I'm kind of imagining you doing this process with somebody. Do you do what, is this mostly virtual or or in person or both?
I do both. I've done them in person, but because I've been here and there and everywhere,
Okay.
offered them in limited time frames. But now that I'm in Santa Fe, I think I'll probably start. But yeah, anyone can book one online.
Fabulous. Yeah, so what is it like for you as the person who is facilitating this process to witness other people's story and connection and resonance with the themes and even the ritual. It feels very ritualistic. And like there's a lot of safety baked into this whole process. And I'm just curious about that in terms of you as the person facilitating and witnessing it.
Yeah, well, I think that, yeah, part of, yeah, as the witness, I think part of it too is that I really, in doing these readings for people and being asked to do them and not even knowing that this was something I would do, I found one of my gifts, or actually just kind of expanded on one of my gifts, which is that I I just believe in people and I want people to believe in themselves. And so when they're coming to me, and I said this earlier, but I feel people are coming for a blessing. And a blessing, the actual definition of that word is to make sacred through praise. And I've written about this also in my Substack, but that's really the definition of being seen. People want to be seen. And so when I can help someone see their own power, see this expanded story, see beyond this kind of limited view that they've had. And I relate, obviously, you know, I'm the wounded healer over here. But like I that just makes that makes my heart full. Like I love to help people grow into larger stories, seek larger adventures, see more enchantment in their daily life. So for me as the facilitator, I'm I'm the namer, right? Like I'm here to invite you to certain names, right? Like jester, queen, king, wounded healer. See if these resonate. And it's the person's role to then try these on and see if they fit and to grow into them. And it's really rewarding for me when people take these invitations and write me about them later and tell me some of the adventures they've been on as a result. So
So I love that. It just feels so empowering. And even just sitting here and hearing you talk about it, I can feel like the resonance in my soul around what it means to take on a reflection that we may not have even been aware of, and how a reading like this can really help us to see those parts of ourselves in
yeah.
in a new way, in an empowering way, which I guess is why it's called Power Story, right?
Right.
I love it. I love it. So
Yeah.
if someone wanted to begin to explore the stories that their body holds before they ever get to do a power story reading, what's one small embodied practice that you would suggest to help them listen within?
So I actually have two things that I would suggest. And the first one is I would ask yourself or journal on what was your favorite story when you were a child? There's something in that, right? There's the writer Martin Shaw, he's also a myth teller, utterly brilliant. He says that myths don't have they speak to us at every age. So they have something for the 8-year-old, they have something for the 80-year-old. You can revisit them over time and find something in it. But I think that we're drawn to certain stories as children because there's something that we're supposed to unpack in it throughout our lives. There's a reason that it calls to us. One of mine is Amadeus, the movie Amadeus,
Mm.
or when that movie came out, and my parents like let me watch it. It was a different era. And at that point I was just interested in the costumes, but there was still something that kind of allured me about it, like pulled
Mhm.
me in. And then I kept watching it throughout the years of my childhood, and I haven't seen it in a few years now. I should probably watch it again. But it's still so rich to me. Like it still speaks to me in so many ways. And I can see how some of those themes have played out in my artwork and in my life. If we can look at the stories from our childhood, I think they give us a lot of clues to our life. It's like having a key, a special key. And and I think that's a beautiful place to start to kind of find what myths have medicine for you.
I love that. And now you've got me thinking about what stories I what my favorite stories were. It's hard to remember. So yeah, that's an interesting practice.
Yeah, and then the other one that I would say is dream work. And dream work comes up a lot in the readings because we talk a lot about these mythological who do appear in our dreams and to start keeping a dream journal. And there's a wonderful book that I recommend by Maciel Clark, and it's called Dream Guidance. And in Dream Guidance, he offers methods for interacting with your dream and conversing with your dream before you go to sleep to unearth answers. So asking, and there's like a certain way you may want to ask a question and keep asking it.
I think so often, so much of what we are holding inside our body comes through and gets processed through our dreams. And a lot of people don't, a lot of people take dreams literally. And I don't, I'm gonna check out this book, but is your experience with dream work around really looking more so at the symbolism and the themes?
Yeah, so I think, for example, I've had Baba Yaga show up in my dreams. I've had, animals show up in my dreams. It really, those dreams that you wake up and maybe you don't remember everything, but you feel something and it stays with you all day. That's something to pay attention to. That's something to let it work on you and kind of dig into it. Like, okay, Baba Yaga, what was it about Baba Yaga? Maybe I need to read some myths about her and maybe, I need to journal on this. So I think it's a starting point to see what's there.
Yeah, and as you're saying that, I'm also thinking about like the importance of both like individual intuition and subconscious and also the collective conscious and how
Hmm.
things whole symbolism happens in both individually. So things might represent something to us as individual people, and then they also have meaning to the collective and really like the integration of those two things. So like what does this mean to you? And then also what does this mean in the bigger picture? Uh,
Right.
so yeah, that's so fascinating. So one last thing before we wrap up. You've written a lot about the magic that happens when stories are shared in communities. And so what I'm curious about is from your perspective, because community seems to be coming up a lot lately as we're 5 years out from the pandemic and people are just starting to really re-engage and craving and needing and seeing how important community is. How can collective story sharing regulate not just the individual, but also the field as a whole?
Yeah, so that's such a great question. I recently received a training in Way of Counsel, and I'm working on an event this winter solstice it's going to be a storytelling council. And counsel, for those who are unfamiliar, is the ancient practice of across cultures and time of people sitting in a circle and speaking from the heart and listening from the heart through using a talking piece. And there are shared agreements such as no fixing, such as confidentiality. But there's also it's an agreement, but it's more of a guideline to be spontaneous. And there's something in that, I think, of being spontaneous versus reciting the story in your head that you are going to tell, and then instead tapping into what someone else is saying. And then speaking as soon as the talking piece comes to you, just off the cuff. I didn't know I was going to say that. I can't even believe these words that are coming out of my mouth. It's the truth. And the thing I love about Way of Counsel is that beautiful, mysterious thing that happens when the truth is spoken because people are listening and speaking from the heart is that is the collective consciousness coming out in physical form. I would love to see more of these circles, but I think what I'm trying to build with the storytelling is that we're all going to get some kind of medicine from people's stories. And I think what's happened now is that we have a lot of formulas for how to tell good stories. we have a lot of rigid ways of saying this is a beginning, middle, and end.
Mhm.
And we've kind of lost our ability to just tell wild, rambling stories that make no sense sometimes. And so part of this experiment is like, let's learn how to tell wild stories again, because maybe something doesn't have a neat ending or a neat tied up with a little bow. This is what it all meant. But there's some part of it that may someone else hears, and it's that curiosity that's piqued again. What was that? What was that thing about the motorcycle? What, you know? And so that's kind of what I see as a collective story sharing is kind of getting more into like our wild, rambling selves and listening to each other.
April, I love this in so many different ways because you're absolutely right. Like this experience of being with people without feeling the need to fix or to have an answer or to problem solve, and it reminds me of the idea of story catching and how important that is. And even, of course, this is where my brain goes to having a regulated nervous system and feeling embodied is to have somebody catch our stories in a way that they're just there holding space for it. And we know that when people have experienced events that have the potential to cause trauma in their bodies, having somebody catch their story is
Yeah.
one protective factor in that not happening, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think this is just such amazing work that you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with you. And it goes back to what I was originally seeking with the power story readings is the witness.
Yeah,
Yeah. The witness and
exactly.
the guide.
Yes, someone to walk alongside you.
Mhm. And if I were to bring an archetype in, I would summon Dante and Virgil. Our guide through the underworld, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, so many layers to this.
Mhm.
I feel like I could talk to you all afternoon, but we do have to end. What if somebody is interested in connecting with you, what is the best way for them to reach you?
So they can reach me through my website, which is www.ecstaticwanderer.com, or on my Substack, which is The Ecstatic Wanderer, and you can find that address at theecstaticwanderer.substack.com.
Fabulous. And I'm going to put all of that in the show notes so that people have easy access to it. Anything else as we wrap up that you want to share with folks?
I don't think so. I really appreciate you inviting me on the show today, Jodi. It's been wonderful to talk with you about all of these things, and yeah,
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here and thank you for all the work that you're doing in the world.
thank you so much.